In studio by the South African Police Union's Mpho, Kwinika to discuss, among other things, training issues. Mpho, thanks very much for coming into studio.
Thank you.
Let's perhaps start with what we were discussing off air. What type of police officer should be sent to a situation where protests of this nature are unfolding?
Most of the unit which is sent out there is a public order policy. Why is it so? Because of the type of training that they receive. They should have at least tactical survival and crowd control, and they have an understanding of the public that they serve.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reaction by these police officers would be restrained in some way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't know what happened there, but the overall commander of that situation should have analyzed that situation. If he has given a directive, I don't know what could have given him that kind of a reason to give for that member to fire at that incumbent. But be as it may, you know, to police crowd controls today in South Africa, it's a very difficult work. You might have seen in the past what has been happening, where you have anticipated that the public is not going to be violent, and the public becomes violent. And once the public becomes violent, the law allows the police to act in a certain way which will be able to quell that kind of violence.
Now, Mpho, as you say, you weren't there, you don't know the situation as it unfolded on the ground, but let's talk theoretically. If you're in a situation where students are protesting, as was the case on that day back in August, surely live ammunition would be the absolute last resort.
It should be the last resort, but
if it's even resorted to at all.
Yeah, exactly. But remember that police must always anticipate that something bad could happen, so that other people are not inconvenienced unnecessarily. So all these sorts of equipment which police are given to use in the execution of the duties, it's normally available even during that kind of protest. So if it happens that the protest becomes violent, then they will have to resort to the resources which they have at their disposal.
And you're answering a question now that we discussed a little earlier. I asked you why police even had live ammunition with them at the scene of that protest. I mean, rubber bullets, that would surely be the next step if the situation does escalate. But I mean, we're talking about a young man here in the prime of his life, studying towards a degree, looking to a brighter future, protesting somewhat vigorously. I'm not sure that deserves the kind of reaction that we saw from police officers.
I think we can all argue about the issue of the conduct of the police officers at that environment. But does not mean that the police should not be readily available for any eventualities. Remember, we don't know what could happen or could have happened in that environment. Should they, amongst the very same students, a guy carrying a rifle, more powerful firearm than the rifle that we're referring to, police still have to deal with that kind of an action. So I'm saying it is possible that all resources which police has will have to be available in an incident such as that.
We understand that, but I mean, given how we saw the horrific situation escalate in Marikana involving R5 rifles, this was an R5 rifle that was involved in this incident. Are police even meant to be carrying R5 rifles to public situations like this?
South Africa is a violent country. South Africa has got lots of rifles outside there. If we want South Africa to...
Do we know whether anyone at that protest had fired a weapon?
We don't know. Police officers anticipate situations. Remember, they need to have sufficient information to be able to deal with the situations that is in front of them. The only thing that we can really try and fight now is to say, was it necessary for that police officer to use that live ammunition? That is the question that we need to ask, and I don't know. I won't be able to explain that, but the commander, the person who gave directives that, which led to the loss of that young man's life, is being arrested as well. And I think the courts are going to find out exactly what has transpired.
I mean, Mpho, we've all been in that type of situation where protests are unfolding, you're unsure of where things are going to go, but the fact of the matter is police do have an arsenal, excuse the pun, of things that they can turn to. You've got stun grenades, which can be fired into the crowd, water cannons, which can also be used to disperse a crowd. The big question here is, why immediately move to an R5 rifle? As the union here, what kind of a defense do you reckon there is, given that we know that there was no live ammunition from the side of the crowd?
Look, I need to say this to South Africans today. that the police guarantees safety to all South Africans, but their safety comes first as well. The training which they are given, it is to ensure that they get into the situation and come out unharmed or killed. They have to make sure that their safety is guaranteed before they could guarantee someone's safety. So all resources which they have to be selectively and carefully utilized, because I believe strongly that the training that they had will be able to assist them in assessing the situation and be able to respond accordingly.
Yeah. I want to talk more about the training for just a second, because you were talking about different levels of training of public order policing, and that would determine the type of reaction you see police having in situations where there are violent protests or protests of any kind. If these officers did not have any type of training, you said they were called from the nearest police station. If they were not given any type of training, what would be the difference in how they handle a situation like this?
Remember, I as a commander again, I should know the resources which I have in front of me. The members who are coming from the nearby stations will be mobilized if there is a necessity for that to happen. But then we know, as public order policing, that this line that is in front of us, it is the line of those people who does not understand the issue of user-friendly kind of policing approach. And then you will utilize them accordingly. And I think that is going to pan out in court. He will explain to the public as to why did they utilize this kind of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. A number of issues that still need to be ventilated in court. Thanks very much for coming into studio and giving us your take on what may have unfolded there. That was the South African Police Union's Mpho Kwinika.